Two saints and their consecration to Mary. These exceptional saints are Saint Joseph Vaz and Saint Louis Marie Grignon de Montfort, who consecrated themselves as slaves to the Mother of God. Just how the two contemporaneous saints, who although geographically far apart, came upon the same idea needs to be examined, and they lived with the same Christian insight which enriched the world a lot. Joseph Vaz and Louis de Montfort were born in some 20 years apart in then the Portuguese colony of Goa and in France, respectively. They hailed from middle class families of deep Catholic culture. Both were serious lads inclined to the things of God and to help others seek His ways. Both were highly sensitive to the sick and the poor, and their religious profile showed they were piously devoted to the Blessed Virgin and to the Blessed Sacrament right from their childhood. Joseph was studied in Goa, whereas Louis de Montfort studied in Paris, both Renaissance cities whose corrupting influences they warded off. Joseph edified his companions by silence and seclusion, prayer and abstinence. For Louis de Montfort, he studied his theology at the Sorbonne. Then he relocated to a major seminary where he had access to the science of the saints. In fact, as to theology, he survived on notes borrowed from his colleagues when he then excelled in both knowledge and piety. The religious life of both Joseph Vaz and Louis de Montfort displays similarities. Both were brilliant seminarians at odds with the spirit of their time. As a priest, Joseph Vaz was sought after as a confessor, spiritual advisor, and preacher, but he received no ecclesiastical assignment. He assisted the clergy in the native parishes, set up a Latin school at his parental home. Saint Louis de Montfort, in his times, did not share the common mentality of the clergy of that time. He had to spend the first 6 years of his priestly life in isolation and poverty. In the eyes of the world, this must have seemed a sober period indeed. But in fact, blessed with divine favor, the Goan priest's spiritual life was in the ascendant. It culminated in the famous deed of bondage only a year after his sacerdotal consecration to God. And as regards the Frenchman Louis de Montfort, in his seemingly dark night there emerged the wonderful treatise called The Love of Eternal Wisdom. When Joseph was approached the Holy See to help him discern his vocation, they perceived his missionary inclination and dispatched him to Canada. This place was a hotbed of juridical squabbles from which Joseph was meekly but surely extricated himself. His gaze was fixed on divine things. Besides praying intently, he set apart and made several confraternities and churches in honors of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Joseph was returned from Canada was the beginning of a new chapter. He helped the two Portuguese priests to hold missions in the Goan countryside. He joined and reorganized a native congregation along the lines of the oratorians of Saint Philip Neri. Finally set out for his deep mission in Sri Lanka, which was at that time under clutches of the Dutch Calvinists, who were Protestants. He went barefooted in disguise and with no organized support. It was a saga of dramatic missionary action which continued for decades until his death in the Order of Sanctity in 1711. Whereas Louis de Montfort experienced a similar march of events. He walked up 1,000 miles to Rome to ascertain from Pope Clement XI the will of God for his apostolate. He had wished to proceed as a missionary to Canada or to the Orient, but the Vicar of Christ appointed him missionary apostolic in France, bidding him to free his countrymen from the Jansenist influence. Saint Louis de Montfort began his work under experienced missionaries. Upon suffering suspicion, he rejected and formed his own team in the diocese of Saint Malo, Nantes, Lucon, and La Rochelle. Hence, the local bishop collaborated setting up educational establishments for boys and for girls. Louis de Montfort also founded two religious societies, the Company of Mary for men and the Daughters of Wisdom for women. It is highly unlikely that the two missionaries ever heard of each other. By the time Louis de Montfort completed his treatise on the true devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary in 1713, his saintly counterpart in Sri Lanka had already died, leaving a Marian devotion as his signature and an inspiring letter that he wrote to his nephew as a legacy of the Christendom. Louis de Montfort died in 1716. Both these priests had drawn out of processes. Louis de Montfort was canonized by Pope Pius XII in 1947, whereas Pope Francis canonized Saint Joseph Vaz in 2015. The act of consecration to the Mother of God was the high point of the lives of these two saints who had paralleled each other so beautifully. The key term was servutus Mariae, means servant or slave of Mary. In the present day, the slave part of it can seem very alien and repulsive, but in past time, when God was commonly regarded as absolute Lord and the human beings happy to depend on Him, the expression did not have a depersonalizing or degrading sense. Being a slave was the only crisp manner of indicating a fully voluntary and wholehearted dependence on God and on his mother. Several church fathers and doctors endows this devotion. However, neither Saint Joseph was nor Louis de Montfort who devised this concept, for it origins dates back to the birth of the Catholic Church itself. In a way, Mary's chaste spouse was its earlier practitioner. The term servus can come to be noticed in the African sermons of the 5th and the 6th century, while in the 7th century, Saint Ildefonsus of Toledo included it in what is regarded as the earliest of the Marian prayers. Around the same time in the East, Saint John Damascene, the last of the Greek fathers of the Church, displays wholehearted attachment to the Virgin Mary. He may well have been the oldest formula of the consecration proper. According to some, the word slave was first used in the 10th century, where the German lords and the Spanish caliphs used to recruit their slaves from the Slav countries. While these were humans owned by others, they were also the traditional voluntary slave, and this accounts for the consecration by Blessed Marinus and of the self-offering of Mary to Saint Odilon of Cluny. Great scholarly theologians, saints like Anselm of Canterbury and Bernard of Clairvaux identified themselves personally as slaves of the Mother of God. This title, Slave of the Mary, finally received official endorsement in the 13th century to the ecclesiastical approval given by the religious order Servites of Mary. The Marian practice experienced a new impetus in the Golden Age of Spain. In the spirituality of that time, the term slave was very common. Saint Ignatius of Loyola called himself unworthy slave of Jesus. In 1595, the Franciscan Conceptionist nun Sister Agnes of St. Paul erected the first confraternity of the slaves of the Mother of God in Alcala, in Spain. The devotion spread to other side of the Pyrenees, where it was promoted by some leading light of the French school of spirituality, namely Pierre de Bérulle, Saint John Eudes, Henry Mary Borden, and Jean-Jacques Ollier. By the 16th and the 17th century, consecration to Mary spread under various designations throughout the Catholic Europe. The Council of Trent generated a revival of religious life. The victory of the Catholic forces in the Battle of Lepanto, which was credited to Mary's intervention, also helped to actuate and accelerate her role in salvation history. This was an immediate resurgence of Mariology and Marian devotions. Beginning from the Catholic counter-revolution, entire religious communities have begun including consecration to Mary as part of their rule of life. One such is the Order of Saint Sulpice, who was founded by Jean-Jacques Ollier. When Louis de Montfort was a student and librarian in the seminary, he assessed the best works on spirituality and in particular on Virgin Mary's place in Christian life. He absorbed freely the spirit of the writings and the teachings of the Jesuits, Dominicans, the Sulpicians, and the Oratorians, the hermits of Mount Valerian in Paris, and other communities of men, and was particularly influenced by Cardinal Berulle. He was convinced that the slavery of love was an excellent devotion. Eventually, he became the world's best known formula of consecration. Unlike the West, the East was uncharted territory for the Catholic Church until the 16th century and relatively untainted by the pseudo-reformist movement which was raging in Europe. In the East, Mary was accorded in the same esteem that she enjoyed in the Universal Church, judging from the number of churches and confraternities that took her name. It was well said that in the Orientals, the fidelity to her was also seen. In Portuguese Goa, the devotion kept up by Saint Joseph Vaz's family was less than a century-year-old household in the Catholic fold was a shining example of how Mary found a special place in the Goan household. Thus, the Marian devotion stands enriched by the singular contribution made by Joseph Vaz and Saint Louis de Montfort. The former expresses profound love and tender care to the sublime Queen of the universe and the Mother of fair love in a memorable document known as the Deed of Bondage. The Vazian consecration formula. In Goa, the consecration has been looked traditionally as something peculiar only to Saint Joseph Vaz. The original deed of bondage which he wrote is not traceable, but Saint Joseph Vaz first published biographer, the Oratorian priest Sebastian de Rego, in 1699 vouches that he did read and kissed it several times in the hope that he would be touched by a spark of the great fire which it was written with. Did the saint leave the manuscript behind with the congregation or with his family in Goa? Might he have carried it to Sri Lanka? Hopefully, it will one day be found among the Oratorian documents. What might have inspired Saint Joseph was to commit himself thus to our Divine Mother? Was it the influence of some teacher or the Jesuits or the Dominicans who were known to have Marian devotion? Did Joseph was find motivation books of spirituality that he came across in the rich seminary libraries? Further, why did he take the feast of Our Lady of the Snows for a red letter day in his life? Was it in fact that she was a patroness of Rome's most important Marian church, popularly called Santa Maria Maggiore? While answers to these questions may remain unanswered, what the Apostle of Sri Lanka has bequeathed to humankind is a precious document with the tenor of both mystical and a direct deed, a unique deed inter vivos, in which Joseph was is at once the donor and a donation, a notary and a clerk, and the Blessed Virgin, donee and witness. While the patriarch Saint Joseph, spouse of the donee, and his namesake, his guardian and angel, the other saints and citizens of heaven are constituted as intercessors before the donee. Joseph was is a ready Christian and Christ like to shed blood in atonement. But far from alienating the reader, the underscores of the solemnity of the act, we also have Saint Joseph was who has written a shorter version of what Saint Louis de Montfort's consecration formula is. Where the Vazian consecration formula, be it known to all who see this deed of bondage, the angels, men, and all creatures, that I, Father Joseph, was sell and offer myself as a perpetual slave of the Virgin Mother of God, through a free, spontaneous, and perfect gift that in law is said to be irrevocable, inter vivos. I give myself and my assets, that she, as my true lady, may dispose of me and of them according to her will. And as I consider myself unworthy of such an honor, I beseech my guardian angel and the glorious patriarch Saint Joseph, most beloved spouse of the sovereign lady and the saint of my name, and other citizens of heaven, to ensure that she includes me in the number of her slaves. In witness thereof, I seal this with my name, and would like to seal it with the blood of my heart. Written at the church of Sankwal, at the foot of the altar of the same Virgin Mary, Mother of God, Our Lady of Health, this 5th day of August, Feast of Our Lady of the Snow, 1677, Joseph was.